Hey Nima, how you doing? Well, no, he can teach it to you. He can't understand it for you. Okay, now that they're out of the way. All right. Good morning, folks. Welcome to day 3. Good morning to Calgary. You haven't met me yet, so I'll introduce myself. My name's Don Burks, one of the instructors here. Up until about a month ago, I was head instructor here for the past 5 years. Now I have moved on to take over the tech team at a startup based here in Vancouver. I've been a web dev for almost 21 years now. I've worked for a few interesting companies, Microsoft, Geek Squad at the corporate level, MetroLyrics.com. I was their senior dev for 2 years. So I've been around. I've taught at VFS. I've taught for Ladies Learning Code. I've taught here. And I also taught for Microsoft. So that's kind of the background of who I am. I'll give a couple of interesting quasi-quirky facts about me. One is I have a degree in music, so I'm entirely self-taught as a programmer. I've never actually taken a course in computers, and so given some of the companies I just worked for, that should give you hope. The other quirky fact I'll give you about myself, in the past year, I've been doing a lot of travel for Lighthouse. No, that's not why I left. And so I've done 54 flights in the past 12 months. And last but not least, I'm a big aficionado of what's called biohacking. And so I have an RFID NFC chip implanted in my hand, so you can boop my hand with your phone and get my contact details. So, few quirky facts about me. Others will come out as I start talking. Cool. Today, the focus is objects. And it's extremely important for us to take on objects very early on in the process of you building up your skills as a dev. The reason for that is with most languages, and JavaScript being no exception, effectively everything is an object, which is great. And we can make that blanket statement, and then you can go forward and go, oh yeah, I know about objects. Everything in JavaScript's an object. Don said so. That's fantastic. What's an object? This is the interactive portion of the morning, by the way. Good answer, tautologically correct. Everything is an object. What's that? And by the way, Calgary, I've got Slack open on my phone here on the podium, so I'll see you if you talk. What's an object? In code, yeah. Okay, that was a really big definition, and it's not wrong. It is a container. It holds keys and values. The keys point to the values, and the values can be anything, even including methods and functions. Yes. Can we take that and compress it? Now you've gone too far. We need like that. We're almost there. Set of data and instructions. That one I like a lot, and we're going to start with that one. So Calgary gets a free virtual cookie this morning. Objects are data and the methods to act on that data. And that's important for us to think about from the very beginning. If you think about an array in JavaScript, just an object, but If we have an array, that array right there, there's no data in it, technically, but we do have methods to act on it. You know, we can do dot length, we can do dot for each, we can do dot filter. All those methods are still there and we can act on it. There's no data, but if we were to go the extra step and give it an extremely complicated set of data here, then now this is much more meaningful. Now this is something where there's some data. Technically, these are 5 number objects that have been collected together in a single unit of data called an array. But now, when we do length, when we do map, when we do, I don't know, what's another one, find, any of those methods that we might run on an array are meaningful in the context of this data. Follow me so far? If I have a string, everybody loves kittens, right? So if I have the string kitten, are there methods I can run on strings? We still have this one. That one still works. We can do to uppercase. We can do substring. Like, these are all methods now that we can run on this data. So that's why it's important that we understand that all of our key types in JavaScript are objects, because the type represents a type of data. And then the data then has methods that we can run on it that allow us to manipulate it, allow us to get insight about it, allow us to report on it, allow us to get that data to interact in some way. And so what's interesting here is because we're still in very much the fundamentals week, we get into an interesting relationship in terms of how we can think about this. I know you signed up for a programming course, not an English class. Work with me for a moment. Data is nouns. Methods are verbs. Verbs take action on things, right? That's what they do. They are acting on something. Well, that's what functions do. Any of the functions that I just talked about that we can run on in that array or on that string, or even if I define my own function, it's still going to be acting on some data that I'm either going to create in this function. You know, maybe I'm going to do math.random. Well, that's still data, or I might pass in a parameter. So now I'm taking action on the data that I give to it. And we're probably pretty comfortable with the noun-verb relationship. We've been working with it for, decades. So if we understand this relationship, it gives us a basis for us to understand everything else that we are going to do. If we have the kitten, and the kitten is then going to be converted to uppercase, very clear noun-verb relationship. And also stops making this be magical fairy dust that got sprinkled out of a wizard's wand and is somehow magically going to create this. We had data. We ran a function on it. Ta-da! We have more data. Functions typically output data. That's what they do. And what's really cool, that's not cool, because that's too small, is if we go into Node, here's a cool little thing. So I'm going to make my function do thing, and let's do this. So we defined a function, and I'm going to run my function. I got 2 lines. that came back from this function? I got 4, because last time I checked, even in the new curriculum, even with a new government in Alberta, 2 plus 2 is still 4. I can say that because Jason Kinney got sworn in yesterday. Sorry, Alberta. So yeah, I got 4. That's what we expected to have happen. But I also got undefined. Why did I get undefined? Pardon? My function does need to return something. That is the return value of my function. I didn't give it a return value. I didn't tell it to return anything. In fact, what's interesting is even when I defined my function, I got undefined back, because I took an action in JavaScript and therefore I had to return something. I can define a function that returns something. Sorry, I missed a semicolon. And when I run it, I get 1 value back. So now I'm not getting 2, I'm getting 1 because I explicitly returned something. My function took an action on the data I gave it and then did what functions do, which is returned data. Even if I don't tell the function to return something, it's going to give me back undefined in JavaScript. Every function you write, if you do not explicitly return something, it will give you undefined back. You may not ever care about that undefined, but it's always going to come back from the function every single time. In fact, if it doesn't, if your function doesn't return ever, that's what causes the spinning beach ball or the hourglass or blue screens of death. If you've ever gotten one of those, that is a function that was running that did not return. Some operation was happening that did not return. So it's important to understand this, because this relationship between data and functions is what allows us to define objects and have them work with other things. Because if an object is the data and the methods to act on that data combined together in a single thing, then that means that this object now not only has data that's kind of baked into it, but it has the ability to produce other data. That's important. That's kind of critically important. So let's look at some examples of some objects. Basic object, really straightforward. And in this particular case, when we're looking at this object, it is keys and values as was described. And we have a couple of different names depending on which programming language you're in. In JavaScript, we just call it an object. But it's also what's called a dictionary, which unfortunately in Python gets shortened to something that's almost inappropriate. Not going to go there. You also will see this referred to as a hash or a hash map. And all that means is keys and values. These are all the same thing. It's all the same concept. Dictionary is not the worst name for it because it matches how we as humans use dictionaries. When you use a dictionary, somebody gives you some crazy word that you've never heard before, or you actually want to go to the Oxford Dictionary and see if OMG actually is in the dictionary. You would go and you would look up to find a certain key, like OMG. And then, if you find it, there's going to be a definition associated with it. Word to definition is key to value. That's how we look stuff up in the real world. We wanted something in code that would parallel that. That's why we built this data structure this way. So if I have this now, I have the ability to do base.a. That dot is not a period like we would use in English, although I've made a bunch of English grammar references. That's a property lookup operator. That dot is its own operation. And it's saying, based on what's left of the dot, that's a variable, that's an object name. Based on that name, look up a property, look up a value on that has the key that has the name of what is on the right-hand side of the dot. So this actually becomes 3 operations. Operation number 1 is we go into memory and we look up what base is. And JavaScript gives us back this. That operation returns something to us. Second operation is the dot. And that's JavaScript saying, hey, based on what's left of this dot, whatever I just got back from that operation, look up a property. Well, what property? Third operation, A. So JavaScript is going to go through the list of properties on the object, find the one called A, and return its value. And that is why this would give us back 1. Similarly, gives us back that. Follow me so far? Clear as mud? Cool. Being able to break that down in your head means that no matter how deep or complex the data object, even if it's an object with arrays as the values, and that array has objects for each one of its indices, and each one of those objects has arrays and its values, if you can follow those 3 steps that I just followed, then you're able to follow all of those data lookups. And we'll get there by the end of the lecture, I promise. But here's the thing. This dot notation works because I know as the developer which property I want to look up ahead of time. So what if, hypothetically, this was a contact in my contacts, list? And so this is the contact, and I have a contacts program that I am writing, and I ask the user, which field do you want to look up? And they would reply back with, let's say, name. So I get name as a string. And now I need to take that, and I need, pardon me, I need to be able to look up something from the contact. So I'm getting input from the user, so I'm going to call this field, because that's the field that they want to look up, right? So can I do that? Nope, never going to work. Why won't this work? There is no key named field inside the contact. That's one absolutely correct reason. There's a second correct reason why this won't work. Yeah. Kind of, you're not wrong, but it's how JavaScript is actually interpreting it. So when JavaScript is looking at this grammar that I have given it, the problem is when JavaScript looks at it and I'm giving it the property lookup operator here, JavaScript doesn't look at this as a variable. It doesn't do what we call interpolation. Interpolation is how we can take a variable, stick it inside of a string, and have it turn into part of that string, right? Well, the variable interpolation here doesn't work on a property lookup. It's like instead of saying thank you, I just go thank. That doesn't work, unless I'm trying to be cool and trendy and start an Instagram hashtag. So this grammar, this syntax now doesn't work. And in fact, this is going to give us an error that field, well, actually, it won't give us an error. This is just going to return undefined. And you're like, but no, I know there's a name on my contact. So how do I take field and look up for my contact? Excellent. You get your second cookie of the day. Square brackets. This is now going to be interpreted differently. And this will return my name. Or the name of the contact. And the reason is, interestingly, from a syntax point of view, and this pretty much stays true for every programming language I have ever come across, as soon as you use square brackets on something, that means you are looking something up or you're dealing with a set of data. And especially when we take a variable name, a noun, and we immediately attach square brackets to it, that means we are looking something up from the set of data that is stored in that variable. Because syntactically, what JavaScript is going to do here is it's going to say, oh, contact, is that something that I know what it is? And it's going to go into memory, look for a label in memory called contact, find what's stored in that memory address, and go, oh, yes, I have an object. And it's going to return that object. And then if I take that object and I immediately attach square brackets to it, JavaScript says, oh, they must be looking something up in this object. What are they looking up? Well, nicely in JavaScript, if we wrap something in square brackets, it can still be interpolated as a variable. So field gets turned into the string name. So this little line of code right there is actually getting turned into that. That's what that expands out to. That's how JavaScript is looking at it. And in doing so, JavaScript goes, oh, is there a key named the string name in this object? Why, yes, there is. And it returns the value automatically. Okay, so the question there is, can you store method names the same way and then look them up that way? Yes, 100% you can. So now let's take this one step further, because you're actually dovetailing pretty well into where I was going to go with this next. So let's add a function. And we'll do that. So we've now added a function to this object. And really all I did was I added another key. And the value that I stored there is an anonymous function. Because the function can be a value. A function actually is an object, believe it or not, in JavaScript. So now we get some interesting syntax. I can say contact, say my name, and that is going to, as you would expect, output, my name is Don. Because there's now 1, 2, 3, 4 things happening here in this line of code. So we are looking up contact, and we are getting back the whole object. We're using the dot, which is our property lookup, and we are looking for a property called say my name. So JavaScript's going to go into the object, find the key called say my name, and return its value. And then as a final step, we are going to append parentheses immediately to it. And in JavaScript, anytime you put parentheses on the end of something, you are trying to run it as a function. Because this is valid code. Pop quiz. What does this return? What if I were to do this? What do I get back? What is going to be output from that? The text of the you mean like everything from 49 to 51? No. You were close. You were close, but not quite. Anyone else want to take a stab? Calgary, you guys want to jump in? Yeah. Just line 50. No, not quite. Yes. You do not get undefined because the function hasn't been run yet. Good guess, though. The function object, Britta, you are actually the closest. What I'm actually going to get back from this is this. JavaScript is just going to show me it's a function. And the reason it's going to do that is when I defined the function, JavaScript compiled it, so it can't really show me the output of it. JavaScript doesn't decompile what it has already compiled. So it just says, oh, that's a function. You know, something like a string or an array, it can show me what it is because it hasn't had to compile it to figure out how to run it. But the function, it's just going to show me this. And in fact, when in doubt, we can just make this happen. So when I load up contact, that's what I get. So that's what it shows. And if I just do contact, say my name, yeah, okay, function : say my name, because it's got the key is kind of the name of the object here, or the name of the function. So yeah, that's what I get back. It doesn't show me what's in the function because it's not stored as a string. It's stored as an actual like compiled action that can take place. But this shows us the difference between this and that. Two very different things. The cool part is that both of those last two lines are doing the exact same thing. They're going to the contact object, using the property lookup, looking up what's in the key, say my name. Both lines of code are doing that. The only difference is the second line of code, I have then appended the parentheses, and JavaScript has gone, oh, you'd like to run the function too. Cool. I'm going to do that as well. Both of those lines of code are doing the exact same thing. The only difference is the second one, I have chosen to invoke the function as well as look it up. A lot of times when we first start off reading JavaScript, when we see a function name that's got the parentheses attached to it, we assume that that is just one unit and they can't be broken apart. I am here to dispel that myth completely. Always, when you are looking at JavaScript, the function name and the parentheses to invoke it are two separate operations. For example, well, if is a bad example. What's a good example that I can use? Okay. Console.log. Our muscle memory forces us to type that every time and put parentheses on the end of it. I don't have to. I can just load console.log, and it's going to do what we just did with the contact object. It's going to go to the console object in memory. It's going to return everything that is the console object. I'm going to do a property lookup. I'm going to look for the key on the console object called log and return whatever that is. In this case, it's a function. I can just look up console, and I get back everything that my console can do. And all of these are functions. If you didn't know that console could do all this stuff, oh boy, console's fun. Console can do some awesome things. And then, of course, if I run console.log, then it does what we would expect it to do. If I run that function and give it some data, it will do a thing. Like it will output to the standard out. I can run console.log without any data, and I get back a blank line. So the act of looking up a function and the act of running a function on an object, different things. Kate was also close as well. She gave me the string function. Cool. And just to be clear, even though the syntax gets a little bit weird, if I do contact square brackets, say my name, For that, I will get back this, and I'll go ahead and update this one so that's correct. And then that means I can also do that, although we're starting to get ugly syntax going here. And that will output that, as we would expect. Because I'm looking up the contact object. This time I'm using the square brackets to look up one of the keys. I'm giving it the string, say my name, and then whatever comes back from that lookup, I'm attaching parentheses to and invoking it as a function. So, pop quiz. Let's do it with parentheses. Will that work? Okay, let's do it this way. All those who think that will work, raise your hand. All those who think it won't work, raise your hand. All those who are too chicken to raise your hand, raise your hand. Okay. Honesty, I'll take the honesty. Those who said it won't work, you are correct. Why? It's good to make a 50-50 guess, but do you know why it won't work? Okay, but do you know why it won't work? %90 correct. The key is a string. Yeah, Greg is correct. The key does need to be a string if I am looking it up with square brackets. But the one step further than that, you're right that say my name is not defined in a global scope. It's not a variable in the global scope. My defining it as a key here does not make it a variable. Yeah, it's a property at this point. So the reason this won't work is there is no variable called say my name. And if I'm going to use square brackets to look up an object property, it has to be a string. Anybody's brain hurt? A little bit? Okay, yeah. The dot, yes. If it's not a variable, if you know the name of the property ahead of writing the code, always use the dot. Yeah. Right, yeah, you can't use the square brackets as a fallback to kind of protect yourself, because the square brackets are going to try and interpolate whatever's inside of them. And the reason that's going to happen is the same reason that I can have this, and then do that. Because if I now say is list.length, I++, console.log, list I. Pretty straightforward JavaScript code. The output of this is I'm going to get a B. Because what's going to happen is it's going to go to list, which is an array, return the array. We're going to stick square brackets on the end of it, which means we're going to try and look something up from it. And JavaScript knows that if it's got square brackets at the end of an array, then what should be inside that second set of square brackets should be a number for an index. And so it's going to take whatever value is in I, starting with 0, go to the 0th index of the array, which is going to return a reference to variable A. And because it's a variable, it's then going to go look up what's in A and return this string and log that out. And then it'll do the same thing the next go around, except I will be 1. It will grab the second index, and that's a variable, and it will return that string. Whenever it's inside square brackets, JavaScript is going to try and interpolate it as code. Whereas when we have the property name, that's taken literally. No interpolation can be done there. So if you know the property name ahead of time, always use dot notation. If you do not know the property name ahead of time, and it's coming from something dynamic, something variable, like a variable, use square brackets. That's definitely your best practices. And the reason is it also allows us to do something kind of cool, like this. There's a method called object.keys. JavaScript will try to interpret it as a variable. Britta was correct. Object.keys is a method on the JavaScript object. Try saying that 5 times fast. That will take any object I put in as a parameter here and give me back an array of the keys on that object as strings. So this is going to return name, email, hair, say my name, right? That's an array of the keys. There's also object.values. But now, what if I do something crazy like and I take this and that's really gross looking, but it works. Arrays and strings have the ability to use multiple methods in one line. String to uppercase dot split. Can user-made objects use the same system, or does it attempt to go into sub-objects? Greg, great question. So that's called chaining. It's method chaining, when we're able to chain multiple methods together. And it's entirely dependent upon the return value that comes back from each method. In this case, he gave the example of string dot to uppercase dot split. So what happens is to uppercase returns a new string. And it gives a string with all the values of the characters in uppercase. That's a string. Therefore, JavaScript has methods that can be run on that string, like dot split. And so it would just go, we'll come back to this example in just one sec. So if I do string dot to uppercase, spell it correctly, split, this is going to return the array. That's what's going to come back from this. And here's why. And let me just check. No, they can't see the string or the screen, so I'm going to change to this real quick. What's actually happening here is JavaScript looks at that first and says, string is a variable, what's in string? And it returns this string here. Dot, property lookup. Well, it's a string, so we're going to go look at the properties on that string. We haven't defined them. JavaScript has those defined. And it's going to get the one called to uppercase. That's going to come back. And then JavaScript's going to go, well, that's returning a function definition. And we're going to go, great, run that as a function. Everything has a return value, so the to uppercase is going to return the string Lighthouse Labs in all uppercase. Dot, property lookup. Well, it's a string. It has properties. We didn't define them. JavaScript did. Give us the property called split. Well, split is a function definition. Cool. We want to run it, and we're going to pass a parameter, which is a new string, which is one space. That's the parameter we are passing, actually creating and passing to split. So that's going to return, split returns an array. Well, now we're done, semicolon, period at the end of the sentence, end of operation. So that's how that works and why that works. We could keep going. When we get back from the split, we could then call .length or .forEach or .map or filter, any of those array functions, because it's based on what comes back from each call. Theoretically, if you are smart enough and have the foresight to manage it, you can write entire programs that are just methods chained together. One great big long line of code that ultimately returns the answer you're looking for. It's entirely possible to do that. But in this case, this is just chaining together a string function, well, two string functions to end up with an array of strings. So that's why that works. Does that answer your question, Greg? Cool. Hashtag thank. Awesome. Back up here to this example. Object.keys is going to return a list of an array of all the keys on the contact object. I'm going to store that in the variable list. Then I'm going to do my standard for loop over my list array. And let's break this out a little bit. Let's make this intelligible. Now it's actually a little bit more readable. So each time my loop runs, I'm going to look up in my list the ith index. So the first one will be name, most likely. The string name gets stored in the variable key. Now, because I don't know what the key is going to be each time, that's why I'm going to use the bracket syntax here. Because I can't do this. That won't work. Because each time that's going to try and look up a property called key. And there isn't one. So I have to do this. So this is going to be a string. It gets interpolated here, and that'll be contact name, contact email, contact hair, contact say my name. Can you use a number literal with a dot? Okay, so are you talking about using that in the same way that you would use it for an array? So no, I can't use .1 because again, it's going to look for a property called 1. Whatever is after the dot is taken completely literally. There's no evaluation that happens after the dot whatsoever. Yeah. Does everybody follow what this does here? Let's actually expand this out. And let's watch it run. Because we already have contact defined here. So, key is name, value is Don. Key is email, value is don@lighthouselabs.ca. Key is hair, value is none. Key is say my name, value is, and this time it actually logged it out. That's kind of cool. I didn't expect it to do that. I expected to see function here. Node's getting better. Oh, that's not a function. Is it global? Nope. I forget there's a method inside Node that'll tell you what version you're running. I forget what version I'm running, so yeah. That's us looping through the keys and then being able to output for an object what we wanted to see. So, difference between using dot and bracket notation. Let's take a break at this point. Let that marinate in your brain. Come back in 10 minutes, and I'll make it worse. No problem. That's actually a good question. Um, yeah, good luck with that. Oh, it does, actually. Huh. That's kind of cool. So that's actually based on an improvement to Google's V8 JavaScript engine, since Node is built on V8. So that's a new thing with V8. Because before, yeah, you would just get the F that would expand out and show you the prototype of the function, but not the actual function itself. Cool. Oh yeah, you get the prototype, yeah. So yeah, if you were in are you on Linux on that? Yeah, you must be. It's ThinkPad. Um, so yeah, if you were in, actually Firefox might do it if you have Firefox installed. Firefox doesn't use V8, but SpiderMonkey tends to do whatever V8 does. Because, why innovate when you can copy? I mean, follow industry standards. That's what I meant. Nudge, nudge, wink, wink. Yes. So, yes, do what the Google overlords say. Of course it has a huge track list. Why couldn't I have picked something with a simple one? I'll pick a few of them. Uh, no, dot length is a property. Yeah. No, it's just a property. It's a pre-computed property. Basically, objects are kind of cool in that when you give them data, like when you create an object, JavaScript has a whole set of things that it does. And in some cases, part of that is just pre-computing properties on things. Like if it's a string or an array, it gets a dot length. If it's a set, it gets a dot size, like stuff like that. Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah. So there's a built-in constructor in JavaScript objects that does things. We'll do 5. 5 will be perfect. Yeah. All right. Let's dive back in. I have taken the liberty of constructing what I will call a complex data object for us. This is a term you'll run into that generally means an object that has many data types inside of it. I think the only main one that I haven't put in here is a Boolean. To keep it topical, I've gone with Queen Bee's album that just got released, and so I have chosen to represent that data as an object. And on top of that, I have nested other data types inside this object. So what I want to do is I want to use this as an example of how our understanding of how property lookups work and what gets returned from that allows us to be able to work with something like this and not get lost in all the data that's up on the screen. Because initially you look at this and it kind of looks like, the dog rolled around on the keyboard and somehow it turned into code. But you have to keep in mind that this is only complex because it's trying to represent a lot of data in one thing. So, for example, at a basic level, if I wanted, and yeah, that is a string. If I wanted just the album name, nice and easy. I know what the name of the key is ahead of time. I use dot notation, and this returns the string homecoming. That's what we would want. But what if I wanted to know how many tracks there were? Then what would I do? Tracks.length. Anybody want to object to that? Ah, there we go. Album.tracks.length. Yes. And again, this goes back to understanding that this part, Greg got it as well, this part is going to return an object. We're going to look up a property on that object called tracks, which is going to return an array. It's going to return just this data, not the whole object again, just that data, which is an array, and therefore we can run .length on it. What happens when you run .length on an object? Does it work? Ooh, pop quiz. So we have contact. Anyone want to take bets on what it's going to say? I mean, would anyone like to guess what it's going to say? I would never encourage wagering on something like this. Who thinks it's going to be an error? Who thinks it's going to be 4? Or sorry, 1, 2, 3. Yeah, 4. Okay, couple 4s. Any other votes? Undefined. There is no length property on objects. So, that can help you out, is if you're calling .length on something and getting back undefined, it's not something that has a length. Because there's a very big difference between counting the number of keys that something has and asking for the length of it. Asking for the length of a string makes sense, because that is one unit of data made up of a certain number of characters. Asking for the length of an array makes sense because you're asking the number of indices that are in that array. That's what defines that one unique bit of data. An object, though, is always just an object. It's like when you're asking for the length of a dictionary. Are you asking how many pages it has? Are you asking how many words it has? Or are you asking how long the physical book is? It has a different context in that case. So, yeah, because we get an array back from tracks, therefore we can call .length on it. We could also call album.name.length, and we would get back 10, because that's the length of that string. So now what we want to do is we want to start looking at things like how would we, if we wanted to work with, let's say, the artist data itself. Here's an interesting situation because here we have artist as an object that has a key with the same name as not only the album object, but also all of the track objects. There's a whole bunch of names in here. And so part of your job as a dev, if you were working with this data, and by the way, this is nothing compared to what you get back from the Instagram API. If you want to see insanity, the Instagram API is just like, think about doing a search for kittens on Instagram, or worse, lunch. Yeah, you get back all the sushi in every bowl of soup ever consumed in North America. So yeah, you can get back a lot of data, and for each one of the entries that you get back from Instagram, you get back the user information, 6 different versions of the picture itself, all of the metadata information on that picture, which filter was used. Yeah, I mean, you get back a ton of stuff on every single picture. And then if you look up something like, sunsets, because, nobody posts those on Instagram, potentially you're looking at millions and millions of photos that you could get back if you went all the way through it. So this is actually small in comparison to a lot of real world data. But so yeah, now we're looking at the fact that there are multiple objects in here that have the key name associated with them. So we have to keep straight album.name versus album.artist.name. And that's entirely about context. Album returns us the full object. Bless you. I was allergic to objects when I first started with them too. I get it. So yeah, album, then artist. Artist returns a different object. Artist is just going to return to us this object here, which has properties on it, which then allows us to look up the name property. And here we get Beyonce, because I don't think she's hyphenated her name. She's too strong for that. Now, what's interesting is I asked about getting the length, like the length of the tracks, how many tracks there are. Well, the tracks are in order. So theoretically, you could use, I don't know if you've ever had to go through a list and find the largest number in a list. Sounds like a prep course task. You could theoretically go through all the go through all the tracks and find the one with the highest number, and that would tell you how many tracks there are. It wouldn't be the most efficient way to do it, but the other thing is, what if, for example, these were out of order? Well, now we have, if we wanted to display this properly, because we can't always guarantee the order that we're going to get data in, what if we wanted to display this properly? This is an interesting challenge for us, because we not only have to exercise our JavaScript skills, but we have to deal with objects that are deeply nested inside of another object at the same time. So, given this data configuration right here, how would we go about listing, let's just say, the names of the tracks in order? What would be your first step? Sort what? I mean, you're not wrong, but sort what? Okay, we could sort based on the numbers. You are correct so far. That's not where I would start. That's, in fact, the last step. And it's good to be able to work backwards. It's good to know that given an array of information that you can sort it. That's good, but we have to know how to get to that array. Greg gave me album.tracks.length and 1. Oh, that was for the length of the object. Okay. Got a couple suggestions coming in here from Calgary. I'm going to wait and see what they're going to say. If only because I've got a Ferris Bueller moment going here, where everybody's like, collect albums.tracks.name in an array and sort the array. That's going to give me the list of track names in alphabetical order. So Britta has given me the right place to start, which is I need to access the tracks first. So what's stored in the variable tracks right now? What data type? Let me ask that. What data type is stored in tracks right now? An array. Yes, you get a cookie. I keep a stack of virtual cookies on my desk. They're gluten-free. It is an array of objects. Yes. So now what I can do is I can look at how I can work with this array to be able to get what I'm looking for. And so now what I might do is sort, which is my next step, but I can't just call that. Because by default, sort is going to try and do an alphabetical sort. Cool pop quiz. What will I get if I sort this array? It's already technically in order, but if I sort it, I'm going to get something different. Anyone want to take a guess? Yeah. Correct. Yeah, 1, 10, 2. And that's because of how, yeah, ooh, I don't even want to try and say that, but somebody from Calgary got it correct. Yeah, sort is, it sounds like the greatest function in the world because it's like, oh, it sorts things for me. I don't have to think about how to do that. But sort is, how do I say, it's special. It has a unique method of doing what it does. And so what you end up having to do is you have to give sort rules for how to do things. And in this case, wrong screen. I need to tell sort what I want it to do. And so the standard thing that we see happen is that we give it a function. And we want to compare our tracks. And so what happens is sort will go through our list of tracks 2 at a time. And it will put the first track in A and the second track in B as it's going through with each pair. Which means each one of these, and I'll just call it track A and track B to keep it nice and clean. So we've got 2 tracks here. Well, what data type is each track? I'll give you a hint. It starts with O and rhymes with robject. No takers? Oh, thank you. Yes, it's an object. I told you today was going to be interactive. So now I need to be able to compare the numbers of these 2 tracks. And the way sort works is it's looking for either a negative number, 0, or a positive number. If it gets a positive number, then it assumes that the 2 things are in the right order, and it doesn't move them. If it gets 0, it assumes the 2 things are the same, and it doesn't move them. If it gets a negative number, then it assumes that they are in the wrong order, and it swaps them. And it keeps going through until it doesn't have to make any swaps. That's how sort works. It's something called a quick sort. So if you're having insomnia one night, if you go home and you're actually not tired enough to go to sleep, then what you can do is you can look up how quick sort works. There's actually a really cool video on YouTube of Hungarian dancers who demonstrate how a quick sort works by dancing out the sort routine. They actually do all of the popular sort algorithms. So there's them dancing, showing how all the sort algorithms work. So if you're really, really bored, you can go look up Hungarian dancing sort algorithm, something you never expected to put into your search box ever, and see some really cool dancing of them doing sorts. So what I want to do is I want to compare my two numbers. So I need to return track A dot number minus track B dot number. Therefore, if B's number is bigger than A's, then it will return a negative number and they'll get swapped. So then I would get my tracks sorted in place. Sort is technically a destructive operation, meaning it reassigns the value back into the variable. You had a question? Can you get sort to use a different algorithm other than quicksort? No. You can write a different sorting algorithm and then pass your array to that, but no, sort by default is hard-coded to use quicksort. So now I could get my tracks in the right order. And going back to the earlier question about chaining, we can also look at what it returns. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to drop this into our REPL. By the way, the REPL is your best friend. If you need to know how something works, if you need to test, if you're not sure what a function does, it's harmless to run it in here. You can't break it. So there's my album. And let's test all of our other assumptions. Album.name gives us homecoming. Album.tracks.length, 5, as we would expect. Album.name.length, let's see if I counted the characters correctly. I did, it was 10. Album.artist.name, we're good so far. Out of curiosity, why do I get undefined back for that? Yeah, the default return value for var is undefined. Because that's the operation I did, is I called var, and the default return value is undefined. Different languages do variable declaration differently. Ruby, for example, will return the value that was set in the variable. Python, I don't think returns anything. PHP doesn't return anything. Java returns the data type, I think, for the variable that you created. Yeah, different languages do different things. Let's see if this works. Boom. So that's cool that that worked. Now here's something interesting. So we said that sort is looking for a positive value, 0, or a negative value. If I reverse the order in my comparison function, so the first time I did track A minus track B, this time if I do track B minus track A, that's how I sort descending. It is the easiest hack in the world. So let's just use this to look at our data here. So the next thing I did here is I've gotten my tracks. So now if I look at tracks, they're sorted in order. Let's go back and do it back in ascending order. There we go. So now tracks is in ascending order. So since it's an array, if I want to loop through my tracks and show the name of each track, How would I do that? Well, there's like 6 answers, but what's the first one that pops to mind? I could. And there's an important lesson to your answer, actually. If you need to loop over something and you have many options available to you, a for loop always works. For loops will loop over anything because for loops aren't tied to the data unless you make it so. So I can always learn how to type. Do this. Well, let's say var track equals tracks I console.log track. And then how do I get the name? Square bracket dot. I kind of already ruined it. What's the undefined? Nope. This isn't a function. Well, kind of. Nope. Good guess, though. One more guess? Nothing was returned by the action. Yes, and I'll figure out how to pronounce your name, I promise. It's the for, actually. The for is returning undefined. It's not anything to do with our data. So if you see this, don't get freaked out by it. It's the for that's actually returning something. Well, you can't with, so the question is there a case of trying to return something from for? You can't because you can't recode for. I say that with big, big, big finger quoting marks around it. Don't recode for. Technically you can, don't. Yeah. Basically because we're not in control of the definition of the for function, we don't get to decide what gets returned from that. Same thing with like console.log. It's going to return undefined every time, no matter what. And if I try and do something like this, I will never be able to get anything in result other than undefined if I try and capture that result. That's just what's going to happen. And interestingly, this undefined isn't the console.log one. That's the var one. Not directly. There's a way to do it, and I'm not going to take you down that rabbit hole because right now it's at the point where it would turn your brain into like Hunter S. Thompson, and that's a bad thing. If you don't know who Hunter S. Thompson is, that's something else you can Google. I'll give you a hint. Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. Cool. So we have these tracks now. We've been able to loop over them and get the name, but you'll notice that the durations are just integers. Anyone want to take a guess at what those integers represent? Close. Try a different unit of time. Seconds. Yes, if she was making tracks that were 196 minutes long, that would be one heck of an album. These are in seconds. And this is actually a really common thing when you are doing what's called data modeling. So you're designing how you're going to store data in your application. It is always a best practice to store in the smallest denomination you have. So for time, store things in seconds. For money, store things in cents. Because then, if I stored duration as, this, that's a string. How do I then turn that into seconds? Like how do I decide whether that is longer than another track? I can't. I can, but I have to go through a whole bunch of data manipulation to turn it into a meaningful number, and that meaningful number would be the seconds. So if I go ahead and store it in seconds, I'm already ahead of the game. Because now I can do something kind of cool. And I can find out the longest track. And that turns out to be track 5 at 263 seconds. Now, of course, visually, I can look at 5 tracks and be able to tell that. What if I was looking at a data set of all the tracks on Spotify? That's a slightly larger list, and that's not something you want to trust a human to parse. So if Spotify wanted to go through their entire list of tracks in their database and find out which was the longest one, that same 3 lines of code works. And will return, I mean, it's going to return the whole array. But what if I did want to find, what would be the easiest way for me to find the longest one and just get that track back? Math.max, but Math.max only works on a set of numbers. I have a set of objects. Nope, don't need a splice. There's nothing new. We've actually already done the code to do it. Yeah. No, because track a.duration is going to get reset each time. Keep talking. Don't need to. What happens when I reverse these? When I do B first and then A? Descending order. Bingo. It helps if I actually define the function so that it returns something. That is really useful. Yeah. Honestly, most of what you would need to do to work with sets of data comes down to for loops and sorting. You can do most tasks. All the other stuff that we have, like filter and map and all that other kind of stuff, yeah, those are honestly just looping and sorting under the hood. They're nice and they're super helpful methods, but like I can, for example, take tracks and filter it. Track.duration greater than, let's say I want everything longer than 3 minutes. Cool. Now I can, now I can do something like that and get what I want. But at the end of the day, what that did was it did a for loop and kept track of, a new array and put results in there that matched a condition. It literally was a for loop and an if and dot push. That's what it did under the hood. So, knowing that I have those methods available, that's really cool. And we'll actually get into a lot more of that tomorrow, or you will get into that with Murat, who's an amazing guy. So smart. But the cool thing is that filter is just another key on the array object that has a method in it that does something helpful for us. But solving these kinds of problems becomes easier. And in fact, given this method that we have right here, we could also just take the data from our big object, our album object, and get the same results. So we don't even have to pull it out into its own variable. We could take it directly from If it was a longer list, can you just do one pass to comparing trackside duration and tracks I+1 duration? Will this save time depending on the amount of data? Great question, Britta. So different sort algorithms work better on different sizes of data. Quicksort has the best overall performance, but technically, yes, on certain sizes of data, you might find like a bubble sort or a merge sort or something like that is going to be a faster sort algorithm. You look like you want to say something. Reduce. So there's a cool site called jsperf, perf.com. I will invite you to go build a test case that tests sort versus reduce, and you'll be shocked by the result. But to Britta's question, yeah, different sort algorithms work much better on different sizes of data. The built-in quicksort has the best overall general performance, but yeah, this is where you start getting into more of the advanced, like, enterprise level coding, is knowing based on your data set which algorithm is going to be the best one. That's not something you need to worry about now. For now, worry about how the built-in sort works, because if you get to the point in the next 9 weeks where you're dealing with enough data that changing sort algorithms is your problem, you've got bigger issues than which sort you're using. Because then you're dealing with like gigabytes and gigabytes of data, like trillions of rows kind of thing. So, cool. Last thing I want to talk about when it comes to objects. So I'm going to go back to my contact object here. Now, when we built the contact object, and let's go look at it here. When I built the contact object and made this function called say my name, I hard-coded my name in there. I just typed it out. But what if, theoretically, I said contact.name equals Bob? By the way, is there a Bob in the room? No? Good. I've never had a student named Bob, and if I ever do, I'm going to have to apologize because I always use Bob as my example person. But I can access object properties and reset their values, assign them the same way that I can fetch them. It's just like setting a variable. And it works actually both syntax. Both of those will do the exact same thing. So if I reset Bob's the contact's name to Bob, and then do contact.sayMyName, it's going to say my name is Don. So I've now given my object like dissociative identity disorder, multiple personalities here, because it doesn't know what its name is. I can set the name property, but my console.log, my function of say my name, is not actually aware of the data set on the object. So now I'm breaking my rule for what an object is, because I said an object is data and the methods to act on that data, right? So this isn't acting on the data that's on the method. So I need to be able to do that. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my contact object here, and we're going to rebuild it slightly. To that. So this introduces what is one of the most fun parts of JavaScript objects, and that is the keyword this. And this is not only fun to talk about because I have to say things like this, and that, this. So that will be linguistically fun. But this ends up being a confusing part of JavaScript for a lot of people at first, because this is what we call a reflective property, meaning it kind of refers to itself. but it's always in context. So I'm going to give you my definition for this. Always refers to the object that ran the function it's in. So here we have say my name function. This only exists inside of functions. It's the only place it has context. And every time you use the keyword function in JavaScript, JavaScript automatically defines this for you. You don't ever have to define it. It's done for you. It's one of those auto-generated properties. And it always refers to whatever object runs that function. And there's a really easy way to tell which object runs the function. That is called left of the dot. Guess which object is running this function? Contact. Therefore, this refers to contact. This is a copy of contact. So if I do this.name, it's the same as saying contact.name. Anytime a function is created, every time a function is created with the keyword function, this gets redefined. Every single time. So let's look at this. So now I've redefined my contact object. So it has this.name, and it works. And it does what we would expect it to do now. So now, when I tell the contact to say its name, it looks at whatever is in the name property. And it grabs that data dynamically. Now I can take this function and I can put it on every single contact object in my address book and have each contact be able to say their name without having to manually type out each person's name every time. And if anybody changes their name, they get married, they transition, whatever it is that's going to cause them to change their name, this function still works. And I don't have to rewrite my code. Does that make sense? Cool. Now let me break your brain. So the thing is with this, like I said, every time we create a new function, it changes context. So I'm going to add a new ability to contact. I'm going to call it yell. And I'm going to assign it to be a function. But inside this function, actually let's call it properly wait and yell. And that timeout will wait 2 seconds, which is 2000 milliseconds in JavaScript. Let me actually write that out. Yeah, that should work. Still, really? Oh, one moment. I just have to, oh, I see why. I missed a closing quote. debugging for fun and profit. So now my contact has that function. So I'm going to call, wait, and yell. Put parentheses on the end of it so it runs that function. 1, 2, and I get undefined screams, og. But I used this .name, it should work. So the challenge is the context of this. Because when I called set timeout and told it to wait 2 seconds, I had to give it a new function to run 2 seconds later. As soon as I defined this new function here, this got redefined to whatever called that function. And set timeout is what called that function. And set timeout doesn't have a name. If you're a Game of Thrones fan, this function has no name. So because the context of this changes every time you use the function keyword, you end up having to manage this. Inside this function, it works. But because there's a new function here, this got redefined. And that's where it gets confusing, is because you have to keep track of which function you are inside to make sure you know what this is going to be set to at any given moment. The solution to this problem is that. And then that variable now has scope. Question? Because I can't guarantee, so why did I not put contact.name? The biggest reason is because I can't guarantee what that variable is going to be called. I could be looping through the list of all my contacts, and the person, looping through may not name all of them contact. If I was defining all the functionality that was going to be part of a contact, and I gave you that list of contacts with these functions defined on them, I can't guarantee that you're always going to name them contact. You could name them C, or list square bracket I dot say my name, or wait and yell, or whatever it might be. So in that case, I would get contact is undefined, and it would throw an error on the very first one. And then your code would work, and you'd flip the table, and you'd walk out. Yeah, you know that feeling already. It's day 3. So here, by creating a variable, at this point in the code, and this is why talking about this is fun, this is different than the this that was here. So this, and that this. This is in the context of this function, the outer one. And that's the method that's being called by the contact object. By defining that variable, JavaScript scope says it's still defined here. And 2 seconds later, when set timeout runs, it will know what that's called. So let's watch that happen. One, 2. There we go. And just for demonstration purposes, we will reset my name back to what we wanted it to be. 1, 2. There we go. So this is a very powerful keyword in JavaScript. However, don't worry about having to use it immediately until you get more comfortable with it. Test it out. Play with it in the REPL first. Get it, make a fake object, make a contact object for yourself, give yourself fake functions, and make sure you understand when this is defined and how this is defined. And then once you get more comfortable with it, start integrating it into your code when and where you need it. Don't treat it like Frank's Red Hot. Don't put it on everything. A lot of times it's like, ooh, new shiny toy. I'm going to use this to define everything. No, don't do it. You'll get yourself into trouble. Play with it first. Know that it's there. Know that when you see it, that's what it's doing, but don't worry about having to write it until you've had the opportunity to work with it yourself. When I send these notes out, you will have this, and I will put it in nice big bold letters, but this always refers to the object that ran the function that it's in. Make sense? Sorta, kinda? Questions? Yeah. No, it's not technically a property of the function. It's a variable that gets defined when the function is created in JavaScript. No, so function.name, no, it does not allow you to access variables inside the namespace, like inside the scope of the variable. They aren't set as properties on the function object. Yeah. This .name is referring to here the name property on the object that called this function. Name is not a property on this function. It's not a property on the function. It's a property on the object that called the function. Yeah. It sounds like I'm splitting hairs here, but it is an important distinction. Does that answer your question? Cool. Britta asked a really good question, which is, how do you move a level up, like this dot variable? You can't really. There's not like a caller kind of property that you can use. Java has one of those where a caller is a reference to the object that called the function. And so, like in the case of this nested function, is there a way that we could refer back to this function scope that it was defined in? We don't have a way to do that. If inside of here, this kind of goes back to your question, like inside of here, if we had a way to refer to that contact object, like an absolute name that we could refer to, then it would work, but we can't always guarantee that it's going to be named the same thing. So this is the workaround for our not being able to do that, is we just create a temporary variable that holds the data we need and put it in the right scope. Yeah. Oh, we'll get to them. We still got like 15 minutes. Mm-hmm. Like inside here? No, if I define this .name inside of here, it is based on the context of this inside that function. So once this keyword function has been used, this has been redefined. So if I try and do here var name equals this .name, it's referring to whatever calls this function, not whatever called this one. So it would be global at that point. Technically, the object that calls this function is in Node the global object. If we're in the browser, it's the window object. We'll talk about that in 2 weeks. But in the context of Node, set timeout is a global function. So there's actually an object called global that has the key set timeout on it, and that's what's calling this function. So that wouldn't work in this case. I do know what you mean, and that's already built into the object to get that name. It will automatically let you fetch that property. So what you would have done in that case, if you defined a new, to repeat the question for Calgary, if you define a custom function in the outer object that allows you to get that property, you have reinvented the wheel. And while I'm sure that yours would be nice and round and shiny, there were a lot of people about 10,000 years ago that put a lot of work into doing that already. Yeah. Don't make work for yourself if you don't have to. And working with this, I'm going to give you absolutely the ground rule best practice for working with this. As soon As you feel like what you are doing is really, really hard and you're having to do a lot of extra work to get the result you want, I can guarantee you, you are going about it the wrong way. 100% of the time. As soon as you're like, oh, I have to define all this custom extra stuff and these extra functions and pass properties as parameters, you're probably doing it the wrong way. There's probably a far easier way to get what you want, and it's usually as easy as just setting a variable in the right scope and using that. That is not messy code. You might want some cleaner, more beautiful, more elegant solution, but one of my ground rules, working code is worth more than pretty code every day. When you go out into the wide, wild world and you have to you have to deal with products that are out in the marketplace, you're going to be shocked at how much elementary, basic, crappy looking code is out there that is powering the world. But it worked, it shipped, it generates revenue. So therefore, it hasn't been rewritten yet. Not all of the code that exists in companies' products is beautiful, elegant code that melts your mind when you look at it. Most of it is if statements and loops and sorts, honestly, because it works. That's why you don't have to get like writer's block when you're looking at a blank Sublime window or a blank VS Code window and go, well, oh my gosh, what if I don't use the right function? If it's a loop, it's a for loop every single time. Start with that, figure out the logic, and then move on to the other stuff. Move on to whether it should be a filter or a reduce or a map or whatever. Because the for loop is going to work every single time. Now that we've gone through like what a sort does, if you need to sort something, use the sort every single time. And then if there is a better algorithm for what you're going to use, fantastic. You've already figured out the logic of what you need. Swap out the function later. Way easier to approach it that way. Because I'm going to give you a truth of the industry. This is going to sound terribly controversial. And Greg, I promise I'll get to your question in just a sec. The truth is, when you graduate this program and you go get a job, there is not a single company in the world that is hiring you to code. At all. That's not what you get hired for. Yes, you have to learn to code to do what you're going to do. But there's no company anywhere, no hiring manager, no dev team that is hiring you to code. They're hiring you to build and support products. Because without the product, there is no revenue. Without the revenue, you have no paycheck. At the end of the day, you are getting hired to build and support products. So you have to go into all the work that you do with that mindset. If the code you're going to write isn't going to do what the product needs to do, it does not matter whether you picked the right function or not. Truthfully. And that's sometimes a hard truth to accept when you're going into the industry, because you're like, well, what the heck did I just spend $10,000 at Lighthouse for if I'm not going to get hired to code? You have to know how to do that. I mean, think about like a carpenter. A carpenter does not get hired to stick pointy spikes of metal into bigger pieces of wood. That is not what they get hired to do. They do that a lot when they are hammering boards together with nails. They do it a lot with screws, nails, a bunch of other things, staples. But that's not what they're getting hired to do. They're getting hired to build a structure that is going to support the use that it's being designed for. Same thing in the dev world. You're getting hired to build and support products. So you've got to go into it with the idea that the code you're writing supports that product and gets the feature to work that allows the user to have the benefit that's going to make them pay $9.99 a month on their credit card recurring so that you keep getting paid. That's the truth of our industry. So, in terms of stuff like this, if writing that one extra line on 119 solves this problem, wunderbar. I don't have to worry about being the most clever or the most elegant. And if I'm a junior on the team and I submit this to my senior and the senior's like, hey, cool, good job, then that reinforces that this is a solution to the problem. And if they come back with, hey, you should probably write this way, or, for these types of problems, we use this, pardon the pun, then great. You just learned a new design pattern. You just learned a better way to code. And the next time you get faced with this problem, you use their tool for doing that. So, Greg's question, can I give set timeout a name? Set timeout.name equals fluff. Yes, you can give set timeout a name, but it won't actually solve this problem because it's the global object that is calling the function. So technically, you could give the global object a name, which would create a global variable called name. Don't do that. That would be bad. That's what we call polluting the global namespace. Because you can't guarantee how many other people might want to write something that has a global variable called name. And if you overrode it to Fluffy Bunny, other libraries might get a little bit upset. Cool. Any other questions about how we got to this point? Yeah. If you can you overwrite global? Yes, you can redefine global, in which case you just lost all of your core JavaScript functions. Yeah. Yes. Well, if I come in here, technically it will let me do that. And now if I try and do this, I might still be able to do it. Oh yeah, because the console is defined as a separate thing. But now if I actually return the global object, it's undefined. Fortunately, all of the other built-in functions are given their own variable names, so I haven't ruined all of that. But yeah, it's just, yeah. If I give you an anvil, technically, yes, you can drop it on your foot. I wouldn't advise it. Yeah. So I'm going to fix my REPL, and because now when I look at global, it's all the things. All of that is what I nuked when I did global equals undefined. So, yeah. You know, that's like on Linux or Mac doing rm-rf/, except, you know, I can turn off my REPL and turn it back on again and JavaScript comes back. My file system, not so much. Yeah. Cool. Any other questions? Now's your time. Okay, so what I'll do is I'm going to send out all of this output, and I will send all of the notes that I've taken here. I'll also send you the MDN reference link for the object documentation. It's pretty dense stuff, but it is good to know what JavaScript objects are all about, and MDN is the, you know, it's JavaScript's holy book of you know, what truth is. So I'll send that link to you as well. And it's not something you need to read or memorize. It's not like there's going to be a multiple choice test on it, but it's something that you want to keep handy, come back every couple months, read through it once, because it's going to have new meaning to you every time. Plus the JavaScript language keeps evolving, so they keep adding new things. So it's good to have, you know, comfort and familiarity with what the documentation says. Cool, thanks guys.